and welcome to today's Austmine Mets Tech Talk. I'm Sheldon Varco, Manager of International Projects here at Austmine, and I'm pleased to be your host for the session today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending this webinar. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will look at the emerging solutions helping to create safer operations and environments for the mining workforce. This webinar is the second tech talk focusing on social value within our ongoing ESG webinar series. Our latest session looked at creating community value, and you can find a copy of that recording and register for further webinars on our website. Next slide, please. For the webinar today, we have 4 fantastic tech talks from MyPass Global, Ethos Health, Creative Pipeline, and Coda Wireless. Our speakers today will look at innovations in areas such as software and systems utilized to simplify and standardize workforce information, fatigue risk management and implementation of strategies to prevent fatigue-related incidences, the role of virtual reality in improving workforce safety and training, and reducing instances of interactions between people, machinery, and infrastructure for underground mines. Following the tech talks today, you'll have the opportunity for audience Q&A. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send your questions over at any time. You can also upvote on the questions that you most want answered. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Matt Smith, the CEO of MyPass Global, for our first presentation. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Sheldon. Thanks for having me. So look, in this presentation, my goal is to expand your thinking around a new way of managing safety critical data in the field and to safeguard your workforce. So hopefully you'll walk away energized by a new model that industry's adopting today that's really allowing data sharing and collaboration to mean that more people are coming home from work unharmed. Next slide, thanks. So look, the reality of it is it's very challenging to track and maintain visibility over skills and competency data. And this is particularly the case for contractors. So as a lot of you will be aware, contractors are often less familiar with projects, with the site itself, with equipment and your procedures. And contractors often receive less training and communications compared to in-house staff. And that not feeling part of the team can also cause contractors to feel less confident to speak out about safety concerns or dangers. And this is exacerbated when there's a change of duties on site. And one example that one of our mining clients shared with us was when there were 2 crews working on a site. One of those crews was doing some hot work involving a 400-degree lance to knock off some lugs there. And one of the members of that crew doing that hot work had to leave and go home early. And one of the contractors from the other crew came across to lend a helping hand. And unfortunately, that worker who came across to help whilst they were a qualified welder had not been trained properly in hot work and was on top of a step ladder with a 400-degree lance melting off these lugs, and unfortunately slipped off that ladder. And that 400-degree lance actually went and brushed the chest of that individual, and as he fell to the ground, and he was very lucky that it didn't land perpendicular to his body and actually cut him in half. And there was a long recovery period for that individual, and when that root cause was done of that safety incident, one of the root causes there was the change of duties that happened on site. The supervisor in charge of those 2 scopes of work couldn't check in real time whether that individual had the proper training and just took it at face value that this guy was helping because he was competent and had done it. So that inability to have that live data in the field was one of those big use cases, and that spawned that particular company to embark on a big change program to improve that. And these factors I've just mentioned earlier obviously all increase the risk of serious safety incidents on site. And so the question really is, how do we get here with all the best intent that we have to keep people safe, yet we're still having gaps out there in the field? Next slide, thanks. And so when you look at the traditional approach that industry's been using, really Excel spreadsheets are dominating. All this compliance data silos within some clunky systems, standalone software or ERP systems. So there's been a lot of reactive processes where it's I guess, on the back foot in terms of trying to get access to the right information that is required for people to access site and to do their tasks. A lot of that training and competency data hasn't been verified or hasn't been verified to the right standard. And there's a lot of manual updates and data duplication happening as well. And what that leads to is higher operating costs, increased compliance risk and errors, and also potential legal action or reputational risk there as well. So the question really is, how do we better manage safety critical workforce data and allow all of industry to simplify, standardize, and share? Next slide, thanks. And so here's the model that we've come up with to really have more of a, I guess, worker-centric approach. So at the center of the ecosystem that we've built is a MyPass skills passport. And that individual, through a permission structure, can connect with one or more training organizations, contracting companies, asset owners or operators, and also with industry bodies as well. And what that really creates for the industry is a single system of record, a single source of truth for that individual, with verified data that goes with them as they move throughout the industry. And what that means is that safety critical data can be made, again, with that individual's permission, accessible anywhere. And so really, what's that about? It's about improving workforce compliance, the onboarding process, but also downstream matching that to other systems that need to ingest that data. Next slide, thanks. And so in terms of the organization's perspective on that, what does it look like for them? It's really about giving real-time dashboards and visibility of who's trained and competent on site at any given time, and real-time access in the field there too, through QR codes and other means to connect with that data. All the data stored in the system is private in terms of compliant with the privacy legislation and the permission structures we've got in place. And what it ultimately does is reduces the risk of non-compliance out there in the field, whilst also making sure that we catch some of the fraudulent training documentation that creeps through in the industry. And what that all boils down to is really giving organizations that assurance that the right people are doing the right work at the right time, and you know it. And that know it versus trusted is a big kind of paradigm shift to where the industry has traditionally operated. Next slide, thanks. And another key piece here is creating a more connected worker. So it's using that workforce information that's been validated for many purposes beyond just compliance. So leveraging that skills passport to feed downstream systems and giving visibility of that worker across the whole life cycle. And that can be cross asset for an organization or cross industry for those that are operating across multiple industries. And so you can see in this wheel here, we've highlighted the core areas where MyPass operates in terms of onboarding and offboarding and competency and performance tracking. But there's lots of downstream systems that rely upon that data for, say, the management and execution of work, people movement, demand preparation, for things like site access, invoicing, wearables, a whole range of great systems out there. But ultimately, you need to know who you're dealing with some level of assurance and what their training is in order for those systems to be effective. Next slide, thanks. And I'll just finish up here on a case study here too, which I think is a really good example of how we can take this model to the next level and where industry is really starting to collaborate. So this is a case study from the VeriSafe program, where the founding members are Woodside, Shell, Chevron, Alcoa, BHP, and Rio. And what they've done here is remove the duplication and waste that's been happening in the verification of competency process in WA. And it was identified that multiple companies were essentially repeating the same VOCs on their workforce and duplicating all that effort and not getting any consistency across the industry. So what we have now is one trusted, verified VOC for workers that are doing high-risk work, and that can be shared across any of those founding members or anyone who signs up to that program in the industry. And so this is a real game changer, as it sets the scene for industry to continue to simplify, standardize, and share, and not just for VOCs, but for any other training or attainments right through to medicals and common safety inductions. Next slide, thanks. And so, look, I'm really excited about the positive change that's here now in the mining sector, and we realize, you know, MyPass's purpose of empowering safe, agile, and connected communities using validated safety data, and the role that can play to really support business partners. And this has come from a new way of managing safety critical data in order to safeguard workforces. And so really, I'm hoping that you feel energized by this new model that the industry's adopted, and to ensure data sharing and collaboration transform safety performance and ultimately bring home more people safely. So if you'd like to discuss this further, then please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to connect you to one of our team. Thank you. Back to you, Sheldon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for that, Matt. A great innovation there in safety systems, and also quite a stark example there you've provided at the start about why this is so important. So thanks a lot for that. I see a question coming through for Matt. So yes, if you do have any questions for any of our panelists today, please pop those through the Q&A box. On to our next presentation. So I'd like to